Hey friends, welcome to Chi Alpha. Before we get started, I just have one quick announcement, and that's that next Monday we will be having large group at Central Assembly. And as a part of our large group, we're also going to be offering water baptism. And so if you've never been water baptized as an adult, we want to offer that for each and every one of you. You can talk with your small group leader about that. If you want to know more, they can give you info on why we do water baptism and also how to kind of be prepared for that if that's something that you want to do. And so I'm really excited to celebrate that together when we get to be together as a large group, which is going to be really fun and exciting. Okay, but for today, our opener question is, who is your favorite superhero and why are they your favorite superhero? Myself, I'm a big Marvel fan, and I would say one of the first superhero movies that I ever saw that I really liked was Iron Man. And I just really love Iron Man. I think partially because he kind of doesn't follow the rules. He kind of will do anything to get the job done and do what he thinks is right. I like that about him. I also think that those movies are just really funny and they have some great music. And so that's why Iron Man is my favorite superhero. All right, but this week we are going to be talking about Jesus's trial and then also his death. So heavy topics. And every time I come to the section of verses or whenever I hear about Jesus's trial, there's always this question that I'm kind of asking, which is, how do they convict Jesus of a crime and have him punished by death? Like, it's just something that I think about every single time, is like, how do they do that? What cause do they have to sentence Jesus to death? And so there are some things to just kind of remember culturally and historically that help us and help, honestly, me every time I read this to realize how they kind of get to that place and how they can actually sentence Jesus to death. Okay, so verse 1 right away is going to talk about the Sanhedrin. And so what the Sanhedrin is it literally translates to council. It's the Jewish ruling council that's led by the high priest, who we talked a little bit about last week.
Senator Amidala will be permitted to speak.
Last time we talked about how they had just arrested Jesus and they put him kind of on a pre-trial that night with just the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin managed the internal legal and religious affairs of Judaism. Okay, so we open on the Sanhedrin being at the decision to take Jesus to Pilate. And the reason that they do this is that it's important to remember that Israel is under Roman rule, which means that they could only do some legal things on their own, but sentencing someone to capital punishment was not something that they could do without the Roman government. And so they bring in Jesus to the Roman governor, who is Pilate. Now, Pilate was in Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, this capital city, for Passover. And he didn't live there, but he would come to the city specifically for the Jewish holiday of Passover, even though he's a Roman governor. So he himself is not Jewish. He's not there to celebrate. But the reason that he would come for this holiday is that there would actually tend to be uprisings from within the Jewish part of the nation. And so he was there to be kind of the Roman foot on the neck of these people so that those uprisings wouldn't happen. So he's kind of there to try to hold that stuff down and have the show of the Roman government. And Passover is a time where the Jews are celebrating being set free from the oppressive rule of the Egyptians. And so when that holiday and that festival would come around, often the Jews would have those same types of feelings that they wanted to be free of the oppressive government of the Romans. And so that's why uprisings would often happen during that time.
Take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
So that's why Pilate's in town, and so that all plays into kind of what happens next. So the Sanhedrin take Jesus to Pilate, and then it says in verse 3 that they accuse him of many things. And some of those things would be that Jesus is claiming to be at the same level as God. He claims to forgive sins and that he has come from God. But we also know that there's just plain jealousy that's happening on the level of the Sanhedrin, and that the Jewish people are following Jesus, and so they're jealous as well. But when it comes to the actual crime on paper that Jesus is condemned for, is that they say that he's claiming to be a king, the king of the Jews. And even though Pilate doesn't see Jesus as a real threat to Rome, which is what the Jews are claiming, that he's a threat to the Roman government, is that Pilate is there to keep the peace. And so when this crowd gets really riled up, and there's a potential reason for him to give into their demand to have Jesus crucified, is because he's there to keep the peace. And so, again, we see that Pilate doesn't really think that Jesus is an actual threat, but we see that he is sentenced for claiming to be a king, which he does talk a lot about the idea of like God's kingdom coming. And so like it's not something that he denies, Jesus himself denies, but that's what he's actually sentenced for. One of the things that's talked about is that there's this custom of releasing a prisoner, and Barabbas is the other choice besides Jesus on who is going to be released. And it's pretty obvious that Pilate is hoping that the people are just going to release Jesus, which would kind of allow Pilate to get out of figuring out what to do with Jesus. And part of why the Roman government would do this is, again, that they're doing things in order to kind of try to keep the peace in Jerusalem. And so Barabbas himself is a revolutionary. He's part of the revolution, one of the uprisings, and he had committed murder during an uprising. But he's the man that eventually is set free. The crowd then, kind of during this moment of choosing between Barabbas and Jesus, the crowd can't be calmed. And so Pilate eventually gives in to allowing Jesus to be sentenced to be crucified. And again, partially it's so he doesn't have to deal with the uprising. So Jesus is turned over to the Roman soldiers, and then it talks about some of the things that they do before he's crucified. And everything that the soldiers do, they make this crown of thorns and they put a robe onto Jesus. They're all these mocking symbols of royalty. And all of this stuff is probably honestly, like even for me personally, some of the hardest things to read about how Jesus is treated and this torturous, horrific death. And at the beginning, I asked that simple question of like, who is your favorite superhero? And something that, while we're kind of reading this and taking the story in, is that in every good superhero story, there has to be this point where it looks like the hero is going to lose, that they're going to be defeated. And that's the point that we're at in the story of Jesus. It very much looks like he's losing. And it's important to remember that everything that's taking place to Jesus physically here has spiritual significance. And so what it seems like Jesus is losing, he's actually winning in a spiritual way. I hope that you guys have a great small group, that you can discuss some of these things, and that we can move closer to Jesus and to one another as we discover him together. I hope you guys have a great small group, and I'm so excited to see you next week at large group.